The first time she was rushed to hospital, her parents didn't know then that it would not be the last time. They didn't know that for the next 29 years, hospital corridors would become as familiar as their own hallway, that their daughter would grow up knowing the names of nurses before she knew the names of classmates, that she would spend more birthdays attached to machines than blowing out candles. But they also didn't know what God was building in the waiting. This is Eleanor's story, and it is not a story about suffering. It is a story about what survives it. Eleanor was born on a Tuesday morning in spring. Her parents, David and Margaret, had waited years for her. She was everything they had prayed for, small and perfect and impossibly theirs. By 3 months old, something was wrong. The doctors had names for it, long clinical names that David and Margaret learned to pronounce before they learned to accept what they meant. A rare autoimmune condition, chronic, complex, the kind that does not announce itself and leave, the kind that moves in and rearranges everything. Margaret sat in the hospital on Eleanor's first admission and made a quiet decision. She would not fall apart, not here, not in front of her daughter. David stood in the corridor outside and made his own quiet decision. He would do whatever it took, whatever it cost, whatever God asked of him. He would not stop fighting for his daughter. The years that followed were not easy to describe. Two people who had not lived them, savings spent on treatments, holidays cancelled for hospital stays, nights David sat in waiting rooms with cold coffee and silent prayers, while Margaret held Eleanor's hand through procedures that no child should have to endure. Eleanor grew up knowing she was different. She saw it in the way other children ran freely when she could not. She felt it in the way conversations stopped. When she entered rooms, she carried it quietly. A low self-esteem, built from years of feeling like a burden. She never asked to be. She was reserved, gentle, the kind of girl who sat near windows and watched the world from a careful distance. She had few friends, not because she was unkind, but because she had learned early that people sometimes leave when things get complicated. And her life was always complicated. She never stopped believing in God, but there were nights she asked him quietly, how much longer? How much more? Is there a version of my life that looks different from this? He heard every word. He was already preparing the answer. On the morning of Eleanor's 29th birthday, the doctors called her parents into a separate room. Margaret held David's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. They had sat in rooms like this before. They knew the weight of a doctor's pause before he speaks. But this time, the doctor was smiling. The results from Eleanor's latest tests showed something nobody could explain. The markers were gone, not reduced, not managed, gone. The condition that had defined Eleanor's entire life, that had taken her parents' savings, their sleep, their plans, and replaced them with faith in hospital corridors, was no longer present in her body. The doctor used the word unexplained. David and Margaret used a different word, miracle. Eleanor sat in the hospital car park. For a long time after, she didn't cry immediately. She just sat, breathing, feeling her body. The way you feel something you have been told to appreciate your whole life, but only now truly understood. She called her parents. Margaret answered on the first ring, the way mothers answer when a child has been sick their whole life, always ready, always listening. Eleanor said only 2 words, it's gone. The sound Margaret made is not something words can carry. David, sitting beside her, understood without being told. He bowed his head and thanked God, in the way a man thanks God when 29 years of prayer is finally answered. In a hospital car park, on a Tuesday morning in spring, Eleanor did not disappear into her healing. She stepped into it and then turned around. To reach back for others, she began visiting children's wards, sitting with young patients, the way nobody had sat with her. She started speaking, quietly at first, then with growing confidence about what it meant from the one you planned. A young man named James heard her speak at a church event. He had been sick most of his life too. He understood every word she said, not because he had read about it. He found her after the service. You said everything I never had words for. She looked at him and recognized something. The quiet, the careful distance, the eyes of someone who had learned to watch the world from the edge of it. She knew that person. She had been that person. Sit down, she said gently. I have time. Eleanor and James got married. 2 years later, at the reception, David stood up to give a toast. He looked at his daughter, healthy, glowing, loved, and he said simply, we never stopped praying, not for one single day. And God never stopped listening, not for one single day. Margaret, beside him, could not speak. She just nodded, because some things are too full for words. Like this letter if it found you today. Subscribe so the next one reaches you. Comment below. Has God ever turned your hardest season into your greatest testimony?